Good morning, everybody. I'm going to call the meeting to order. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Treaty 1 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. My name is Marla Billinghurst and I'll be chairing the panel this morning. To my left is Mr. Brent McIntyre and to my far left is Ms. Cynthia Stevens. The assessor this morning is Mr. Jason Brown and the recording secretary is Ms. Belen Rojo. We will be hearing applications for revision of assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that applicants or the assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration, and makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemption from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record.
Please state your full name.
Jason Brown.
And you affirm the evidence about to present is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Please state your full name.
Mark Newman.
And you swear the evidence about to present is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, the first matter on this morning's docket is 780 Powerhouse Road. Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the subject is located at 780 Powerhouse Road. Roll number is 075691333400. Owner is the Winnipeg Airports Authority, Her Majesty the Queen, and Brock Belmont Winnipeg Holdings. This is a airport hotel, which is why you see the WAA and Her Majesty as the owners. We are defending a 2020 assessment of $14,990,000 today. This hotel was built in 2014, so this is a newer hotel. I do have a quick assessment history on this hotel. So for 2014, there was a hearing. The decision was set at $6,844,000, and there was no municipal board on that. For 2016, the value was set at $7,165,000, and once again, there was no municipal board. And for 2018, the value was set at $9,876,000. So this hotel consists of one building, which is 6 stories, has a licensed capacity of 231 seats and 121 guest rooms. On the second page of my brief, you can see the request for income information. Once again, 2014, this was a new construction. The subsequent 3 years, which you will see in my income workup, were received complete. We can move to page 3, which is my estimate of value by income approach. So once again, you'll see 3 years of income and expense data, 2015, 2016, 2017. 2015 was the first full year of operation. Therefore, 2016 was the second full year, 2017 was the third full year. So this hotel is still ramping up. It is doing very well. You'll see the income is increasing from just under 4 million to just over 5 million in the 3 years. We've stabilized using the actual 2017 at 5,110,471. Departmental expenses, once again, we've stabilized using actuals as what was reported in 2017. The bottom line there is 1,732,999. For the undistributed expenses, once again, we've used all actuals as reported in 2017. Administration in general at 581,454. Marketing actual at 117,434. Energy and water actual. Repair and maintenance is actual. Franchise fees are actual. We do have 2 deductions that don't show as reported. Those are management fees and FF&E reserve. You'll see those at the bottom of undistributed expenses. These are deducted in order to take the business value away from the hotel. We're only valuing the building and the land, and not the going concern or the business value. So we deduct 4% for management, which you'll see at 204,419, and 3% for FF&E reserve at 153,314. These are standard deductions that are used for every hotel in the city by the assessment department. So you'll see the undistributed expenses, we've stabilized at $1,547,008. Once again, these are actuals plus the management and reserve deducted. For the fixed expenses, once again, we've used the actual business taxes and the actual property taxes and the actual insurance, which stabilize at $243,336. So you'll see the stabilized net operating income at $1,587,128, which is all actuals. You'll see the 3 NOIs at the bottom, 1,400,000, 1,800,000, 1,900,000. So we've used the 1,900,000 plus the deduction for management and FF&E reserve, which gives us the stabilized NOI of 1,587,128. We've capitalized at 9%. There are 3 airport hotels. The other 2 have 8.5% cap rates. We've given this hotel an extra half point on the cap because the other 2 are full service and this one's a focus service. And then you'll see the FF&E deduction, which is furniture, fixtures, and equipment at 15%. Once again, this is a standard deduction for hotels. This gives us our final value of $14,990,000 rounded. On the following page, you'll see the breakdown for administration in general. Once again, we've used the actuals at $581,454. And then you'll see the reconciliation. So this is anything we've taken out of the statements. And you'll see that the NOIs reconcile with the previous page. So for 2017, in fact for all 3 years, we've removed the land lease. So the hotel doesn't own the land, they pay a land lease to the airport authority. We deduct these on all the hotels at the airport, for every property at the airport. We treat these akin to a mortgage, which is obviously not included in any income workups as an expense. We're valuing the fee simple interest today, which is an unencumbered land, which is why that is not allowed into the expenses. On page 5, you'll see our capitalization rates. So hotels are located at the bottom of the graph. You'll see a spread from 8.5 to 10 for full service, 9 to 10 for select or focus service, and 10 for limited service. Colliers, so I'll just highlight the select focus service, which is what the subject property is. Colliers coming in between 8.5 and 9.75. CBRE coming in between 7.5 and 8.75. Some photographs of the subject property on pages 8 and 9. Once again, this is a new hotel. I have inspected this hotel. Obviously it has all the amenities that you would expect to see in a focus service hotel, and obviously all the finishes are new and all current. Picture of the lobby on page 9. Some standard rooms on page 10 and 11. Page 12 shows boarding pass station and some media pods. Page 14, we have the fitness center and their eating area, the bistro it's called. Some meeting rooms and banquet rooms on page 15. This is a Winnipeg Free Press article on page 16. You can see the date, 2014. Highlighted second paragraph. This is a $20 million hotel when it was built. Of course, that doesn't include the land because it's on a lease, so it would have been even higher if they bought the land. 121 rooms, and once again, this was a 2014 hotel, so they were celebrating their grand opening. Some more highlighted passages on page 18. Just saying that it's met their expectations and that the demand for rooms at the airport is strong to support 3 hotels. And that their design caters to the next generation of business travelers. Have the income and expense statements on the following pages. Once again, we've used 100% actuals. These were filled out by the president of Brock Hotels. And we've used 100% of the actuals. Based on that, we ask that the assessment be confirmed at $14,990,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Newman, do you have questions for the assessor?
I do. And
Please go ahead.
let me say to the panel that the 2 hotels you're going to hear this morning have all of the same issues. And I'm not sure if any of you have ever heard hotels before. Hotels are valued in a different way than typical commercial real estate. And so what I'm going to do is take a few minutes and ask the assessor some general questions about the methodology to help you understand the methodology. And that in turn will help inform you about the various positions we're taking in respect of this matter. And I won't do it a second time when we come to the next property, because I will have done it once.
Thank you.
Mr. Brown, how long have you been with the assessment department?
2009,
How long have you been doing hotels?
2012.
So, you agree that the assessor can only value the real estate,
Bricks and mortar and underlying land, correct?
cannot value business value, cannot value the chattels, equipment that's in the hotel?
That's correct.
Okay. And this methodology that you've presented, how, for as long as you have been with the department, it has been the standard methodology used?
That's correct.
The Act, the Municipal Assessment Act, says you have to determine what a willing buyer would pay to a willing seller at the applicable reference date, and in the context of a hotel, that means for the real estate owner.
Correct.
As you've indicated, you've used the actual income and expenses, but you removed business value, you explained, through a 4% deduction.
For management, correct.
Right. And you also talked about the replacement reserve also being intended to remove business value. Let me take issue with you a little bit in that regard, and let me suggest to you that the purpose of the replacement reserve is to reflect the fact that hotels have to spend money on an ongoing basis to maintain their image. The furnishings in the room, the wall coverings, the carpets, things like that, they have to be replaced quite frequently in order to keep the customer satisfied with the quality of what they're getting. Those are expenses that won't necessarily find their way into the income statement, and therefore a reserve to be able to fund those expenses is created. Do you agree that's the purpose of the reserve?
That's correct.
Okay. So through all that, you get to a net operating income, you apply a capitalization rate, and as you indicated, you remove 15% once you get to the bottom of the calculation to reflect the removal of the non-accessible furnishings, fixtures, and equipment.
That's correct.
And what's left through a process of deduction theoretically is the value of the real estate.
That's correct.
Okay. The city gets questionnaires from hotels,
Correct.
and the example of the one from this hotel is in your brief. The city publishes a manual every cycle that reflects the industry average for various types of expenses and revenues.
Correct.
Does the manual account in any way for what I'll call the sweat equity of the owners in operating their own business?
I mean, generally, that would be included in the management wages.
Right. And if they don't take wages, it won't be there, will it?
That's correct.
Okay. And you talked in the context of your capitalization rate page, and I'll come back to that in a moment, but in a general sense, hotels are grouped into different types. You mentioned full service earlier, and full service is a property that will provide rooms, restaurant, banquet, meeting, convention capacity. That's a full service property.
Correct.
The Fairmont, for example, is an example of that.
Correct.
The subject property, I think you indicated, is a focus or select service,
Correct.
and that's because its emphasis is on rooms. Right?
Correct.
It doesn't do banquets, it doesn't do conventions. Typically, they don't have any significant restaurant space on site, and that's why they're titled either select or focus service.
That's correct.
What's the difference between a select or focus service on the one hand and a limited service on the other?
The lines are pretty blurry nowadays. There's everything in between.
All right. And would you agree with me that there have been no sales in Winnipeg for many years of either a select service or a focus service property?
I would say that's correct.
And so the capitalization rates that are reflected in your chart, and you mentioned Colliers and you mentioned CBRE, those are from other locations in Canada.
I can't speak to how they generated theirs, but
But they're not from Winnipeg, we can agree on that.
I mean, they claim that these are Winnipeg cap rates, so I don't know how they could generate them from different locales, but
But you know there are no sales in Winnipeg.
I think he's answered the question to
All
the
right.
best of his ability.
So, and frequently hotels will have what's called a flag, which means they're affiliated with a franchise.
this particular hotel does have a flag, yes.
So the Marriott is, the one we're going to come to next, the Mir, is not a flagged hotel, correct?
Correct.
All right. So, you mentioned the history of this hotel in terms of its assessment. So in 2018, the assessment was $9,876,000, and for 2020, the assessment is proposed at $14,990,000, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So let's then go, please, to page 3 of your brief. And the stabilized column you've explained represents the actual revenues and expenses for each of those items in the 2017 year.
Correct.
Okay. And For example, when you get to the undistributed expenses of $581,000 at 11.4%, is it correct that the manual published by the city indicates that the industry average is 19.5%?
That's correct.
And for marketing, you use 2.3%. Is it correct that the manual indicates that marketing is 4% as the industry average?
The industry average would be 4%, that's correct.
And for repair and maintenance, you use 2.4, but the manual indicates that the industry average is 5.5%.
Correct.
Okay. Let's talk just a little bit more about the reserve for a moment. You've indicated that the FF&E reserve is allowed at 3%. As long as you have been with the department, it's been 3%.
That's correct.
Do you have any idea of the history of where that number came from?
Well, the approach we use is based on a Rushmore approach. So, yeah.
So, to help the panel, Stephen Rushmore is a well-known author and appraiser and valuator in the hotel industry, correct?
Correct.
And he's written a number of textbooks.
That's correct.
And this methodology that we see here essentially came from him 30 or 40 years ago.
Yes.
Okay. And I anticipate the department has on its bookshelf the Rushmore publications.
That's correct.
As do I. Okay. So, and the 3% reserve I'm going to suggest to you is historical. Do you have any familiarity with an organization called the International Society of Hospitality Consultants?
Not familiar with that.
Not familiar with them. Have you ever heard of what are called CapEx studies?
Not until I looked at your evidence.
Okay. Okay. Does the city have the CapEx studies by the International Society on its bookshelf?
We do. I have never seen them before.
Now, you made reference to the lease. So this hotel pays the Winnipeg Airport Authority $82,500 per year.
Correct.
And that allowed it to locate the hotel at the airport. You don't allow that expense. You've explained why. Do you agree, however, that anybody who bought this property, if I or any member of this panel bought this hotel, we would have to pay that expense?
That's correct.
And do you agree that every buyer who's going to buy this hotel is not going to ignore that expense?
Would be similar to buying the land and having a mortgage, in my mind.
Okay, but you agree they would not ignore the expense?
No.
Let's talk about capitalization rate. You indicated that the two hotels nearby at the airport each receive an 8.5 cap,
That's correct.
and you indicated they were full service.
Correct.
This hotel gets a 9% capitalization rate. Why does it get a 9% capitalization rate?
We feel that it has a superior location. Airport hotels do very well, as you can see with the increasing revenue and NOI. The other two hotels were confirmed at 8.5%. So we give it a half point just because of the difference in operations.
Okay. So if we look at page 5 of your brief, that's the cap rate chart. And down at the bottom, you indicate that the City of Winnipeg data, in the City of Winnipeg column, it indicates that the 20th and 80th percentiles for select and focus service hotels are at a 10% cap.
Correct.
Do other select and focus service hotels in the area receive a 10% capitalization rate?
Yes, some of them are older. The further you get away from the airport, the less desirable it is.
Okay. Now, did you say earlier that the reason this hotel gets a 9% capitalization rate is because you believe it has a superior location?
Yeah, I believe this is one of the better select service hotels in the city.
And I think you said that that's reflected in the increasing revenue.
Correct.
So by decreasing the capitalization rate, and using the revenue that the hotel is able to generate at the airport, are you not taking into account the location twice? Once through the revenue and a second time through a premium, lesser capitalization rate?
Well, this hotel's always had a 9 cap, and then because it's ramping up, the NOI's gone up, so.
That doesn't answer my question, though. Are you not effectively counting twice the benefit of the location, once through the revenue stream and the second time by a lesser capitalization rate?
I don't believe we have. We've used the actual income and expenses as reported by the president, and we've used the same capitalization rate that we always have on this hotel.
Right, but why do other nearby hotels that are on Berry Street, for example, that are select service hotels get a 10% capitalization rate?
I feel that even being just a bit further away from the hotel is less desirable than being at the hotel, or at the airport,
So
sorry.
there's a greater risk to an investor, you're suggesting, because that's what a capitalization rate is
Yeah,
about.
I think this has been asked and answered. We've gone over the cap rate.
No, I don't-
Why,
I
why
don't
he,
think- I
why
don't
he
think we
feels this
have
one's
yet.
9%.
Well, may I ask my question? Let's let him. Are you suggesting that to an investor, by virtue of being on Berry Street, perhaps half a mile away, there is a greater risk than being at the airport?
I believe so. A traveler coming in would have to get a shuttle, whereas at this airport, or this hotel, they can just walk there.
This hotel is not attached to the airport.
It's not attached.
In fact, one has to walk around or through the parkade to get to it.
That's correct.
Those are my questions, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Stevens, do you have any questions?
Just a couple. So you mentioned in one of your responses that it's a bit of, getting to be a bit of a gray area between select focus service hotel and limited service. So in your opinion, what would have made this a select focus rather than a limited service?
So, like, there's fitness rooms. This one does have a small restaurant where there is some food available. There is meeting rooms, so it does have some amenities that maybe some limited services wouldn't.
Okay, so that's, and my next question was just about the fact that you've used all the actuals, and I have done hotels before, but it's been about a year, so I'm just trying to recall. Because most of the other presentations we're seeing from the city in this cycle have been completely model driven. Are you doing all hotels based on actuals? Did you just do this hotel?
Generally, when the rooms hotels generally report pretty cleanly in their financials. We compare everything to the industry norms. We look at the trends, like this one's trending up. And we felt that just using all actuals was reflective of how we.
So you're not necessarily using actuals for every hotel property, but you did on this one because of those factors?
Generally, you'll start to see a lot more adjustments in the beverage hotels, where the expenses start to get a little blurred and the way they report gets a little more blurry. But this one, yeah, we've used what they've submitted, and we didn't feel that any adjustments were necessary.
Okay, that's all I had, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McIntyre?
What's the term of the land lease?
I believe it's till, and I have this in my rebuttal package, which I'll be submitting after Mr. Newman presents. So we can go more into it at that point. Find it here. Okay, so, lease started in 2012, January 1st, and it expires December 30th, 2076.
The occupancy rate on this hotel, based on actuals, is 70.9%.
That's correct, and they actually say at about 80% you should start expanding. So this hotel's doing
How does
very
that
well.
compare with the other airport hotels?
I had the grand a couple weeks ago, and I can't remember what their occupancy rate was, but they're doing really well as well. All the airport hotels are doing really well.
Okay, that's fine.
I have no questions, so Mr. Newman, please proceed.
Thank you. So, what I attempted to do by addressing with the assessor in a general way is give you more of a sense of how hotels are done. What I'm going to do is, there are various tabs attached to my brief. I think what I will do is I will start by going through the text, and as I'm going through it and want to draw your attention to an attachment, I will do so. So, first page is just a general discussion about the lease, $82,500 a year, the proposed assessment at $14,990,000, the 2018 assessment $9,876,000, so that's a 51% increase. I then move on to discuss methodology. I've generally spoken about that already. In the heading on page 2, the assessment, I described to you what the assessor has already explained, how the assessment is arrived at. And then I list the issues, and so at the top of page 3, the issues I list by bullets are the disallowance of the $82,500, the replacement reserve of 3%. I say to you it should be higher, and I'll address that in greater detail. The 9% capitalization rate, I'll show you a variety of hotels very nearby that are getting a 10% rate. There's an argument that because this hotel is on leased land, there should actually be a higher capitalization rate for that. I'm going to suggest to you that this assessment is not equitable, and then I'm going to address with you the level of certain of the expenses. And as the assessor indicated in response to the question, that the department does compare everything to industry norms. That was Mr. Brown's evidence, and I'll address that in some greater detail. So, at the bottom of page 3, the lease, $82,500 a year. No purchaser is going to ignore that expense. There have been some decisions that have dealt with this issue. It's a long time ago. On page 4, there's a quote from the decision dealing with the Four Points Hotel, which is also at the airport. I was counsel in that case. The decision is attached to tab 4, and the decision of the municipal board was, and you can see it underlined 2/3 of the way down the page, the building and the land comprising the subject property constitute one business entity. Together it produces the income stream. And it goes on to say, it is unthinkable in the board's view that a prudent buyer of the hotel property would turn a blind eye to this substantial fixed liability of $50,000 annually. Therefore, the board finds the lease payments to be a legitimate business expense and will allow this deduction as requested by Lakeview. So that was the decision of the municipal board in the context of the 4 Points, which is on the airport campus as well. Then on page 5, there's a decision relating to 360 Main Street, which is the large office building at the corner of Portage and Main, one of the large office buildings. And this was a case where an issue arose with respect to an air rights lease, because the building was built originally on an air rights lease. And the question arose as to whether that air rights lease should be taken into account. And you can see shaded in gray, the city lawyer, Ms. Pombrin's argument was inconsistent with the actual calculation used by Mr. Ferguson. Mr. Ferguson was the city's appraiser, who deducted, as did Mr. Morisuti, the land lease as an expense. And then below that, you can see the calculation again. It's in gray. The land lease of $325,587 was allowed as an expense to get to the net operating income. So I say two things in relation to this. In the real world, a buyer is not going to ignore this expense. It's reality for them. It erodes their net operating income. They can't be there without it. We've heard lots about a superior location. Well, it costs more to be in a superior location sometimes. So, because common sense should tell you that nobody will ignore this, I'm gonna suggest to you that it should be allowed. And there's also two decisions of the municipal board where a lease expense has been allowed. Okay, so that's the lease issue. Let me now move to the replacement reserve. So, and again, I just want to mention, as I, through cross-examination, clarified with the assessor, the purpose of the reserve is not to remove business value. The purpose of the reserve is to essentially create a fund, a reserve, because, look, we all stay in hotels. We know that when they start to look tired and worn, we're not that happy. And so the hoteliers constantly have to maintain their product and upgrade it, and it costs money to do that. That's what the reserve is all about. So the municipal board has dealt with this as well. I'm saying to you that the history of the reserve, and let me say to you that the hotel methodology really started in around 1990. The first case involved what was then the downtown Sheraton Hotel. It later turned itself into an apartment building. I was counsel in the beginning in that case, and this whole Rushmore methodology that the assessor has spoken about, it's the methodology that's been used, but the 3% reserve goes back to a different era. Indeed, Mr. Rushmore has written about this issue. If you go to my tab 8, tab 8 is an article that Rushmore wrote in which he essentially says that whatever historically the reserve may have been at 3%, that no longer works, suggesting that the reserve should be in the range potentially of 7 to 11% of revenue. The article describes the need to replace and fix and maintain the FF&E on an ongoing basis. Shag carpeting was in style at one time, pink tiled bathrooms were in style. That's all gone, it's got to be turned over. So the very man who created the methodology is also suggesting that the reserve needs to be higher. But not only is he suggesting it, and I'm back to page 6 of the text of my brief, you have a case where our municipal board, in the context of 2 hotels actually, Place Louis Riel, which started its life as an apartment building, got converted to a hotel, and is now converted back to an apartment building. It was a case where the board allowed a 5% reserve, expressing the view that this was a hotel that was a rooms business. It didn't have a restaurant. There was a tenant restaurant on site on the main floor, but the hotel did not operate a restaurant. The hotel did not have beverage facilities. It didn't sell beer. It was fundamentally a rooms hotel, and the board felt that a 5% reserve was appropriate because if you look at beverage hotels, for example, you'll have very high revenue associated with VLT or vendor sales or the beverage room itself, and if you start taking a percentage of that, it's going to create a very high dollar amount. When you're only dealing with rooms, this board was satisfied that it was appropriate to allow a higher reserve. But not only are they saying it, other authorities are saying it as well. So if we go to, I'm on page 7 of my material now, just below the quote, and there I talk about the International Society of Hospitality Consultants. This is an organization that has been around for a long time. Their sole business is to study and analyze capital expenditures made by hotels. And if you go to tab 7, here is the CapEx study published by this organization. It covers the period 2013 through 2017. if you go to the third page in, and the page numbers are located on the margin in the middle, so the third page in, you'll see the number 53, just to assist you with where the page numbers are. But you can see here that for select service hotels, 2013 to 2017, airport locations, they have the highest average annual CapEx spending at 8.3%. More generally, all select service hotels, so that'll be both airport and non-airport, are at 5.3%. And what this study does is it analyzes and collects the data from a variety of hotels of all types in a variety of locations, airport, urban, suburban, downtown, and it analyzes what they spend on capital expenditures. And if you come back to page 7 of my text, in the lower half of the page, I describe where you can find this data. I indicate, for example, that on page 86, they indicate that the combined repair and maintenance and capital expenditure will be 13.7%. So page 86, and you're gonna find on that page number is on the left-hand side of the page. There are the graphs, there are the charts that explain the combined expenditures for select service hotels, indicating that at the airport locations, they total 13.7%. So all of this is intended from a very, very reputable organization to help you understand that whatever historically may have been appropriate, and that 3% number the department is using, it's a historical number, that's all it is. It's no longer the appropriate standard, it no longer works. And not only are they saying it, but the Municipal Property Assessment Assessment Corporation, MPAC, which is the assessing authority in Ontario, if you look at tab 9, tab 9 is their handbook on how to value hotels in Ontario. And I put excerpts from it here to help you understand that in a general sense, the Manitoba methodology is not unique to Manitoba, it's used across Canada. But also, they recognize the concept of the reserve. If you look at page 15 in the lower right-hand corner, there's a heading Reserve for Replacement. And it says, due to the fact that hotels offer transient accommodation and occur high traffic in both the rooms and common areas, there's a need for regular replacement of relatively short-lived furniture, fixtures, furnishings, and equipment. A reserve for replacement is a deduction from the hotel's operating income, which creates a fund from which to draw on to keep up with the ongoing replacement of short-lived items. So, again, I think we all recognize that that's the purpose of this. And what I'm suggesting to you is that a 3% reserve is outmoded. It's not recognized by the industry. It needs to be higher. And I'm suggesting to you 5%. And I'll show you those numbers when I get to my spreadsheet. Other operating expenses, page 9. So in both these hotels, ownership plays a very active role. And because of that, sweat equity, as I call it, is not taken out in the form of salary, and so the management wages are less than they might otherwise be. And we see that in a variety of the indicia, a variety of the ratios for this hotel. If we go to tab 2 of my brief, this is the manual that the city publishes in each and every cycle. And if we go to page 3 of the manual, you will see a listing of expenses for the major expense categories. And the department divides it into hotels as opposed to beverage hotels. And hotels will be all that spectrum of things, from the Fairmonts of full service to the Subject, which is a select, to more limited service. So They tell you, for example, that rooms department expense is typically 30% of revenue on average. They tell you that administration in general is 19.5%, marketing is 4%, repair and maintenance is 5.5%. Those are the expense ratios. Remember that the next two items, management fee is about removal of business value, and the FF&E reserve we've just discussed at some length. So these are the ratios that they're suggesting to you average hotels will incur. And when people come to buy average hotels, the assessor indicated in response to a question from member Stevens that yes, everything is compared to industry norms. In this case, a decision was made to use the actuals, but as I'm going to detail for you, in this case, the actuals are well below the industry average, and I'm suggesting to you there needs to be some additional stabilization of certain of those expenses, and I will show you exactly what I have done in a moment, but it is all detailed in text on page 9. And so what I am telling you, there's 4 bullets on that page. Those detail the adjustments. So what we did is the rooms department expense of 27.8%, we moved it to 28.5%, which brought it up and would require an additional $31,540 of expense. Admin in general, we increased to 14.9% of revenue. It was allowed at 11.4. The industry average is 19.5, so we moved it up somewhat, and that means there has to be an additional expense allowance of $180,000. Marketing, industry average is 4%. In this hotel, it was 2.3%. We increased it to 3.5%, so there's an additional $61,000. And repair and maintenance of 2.4% was increased to 4.5%. Industry average is 5.5%. So we made those adjustments, and I'll show those to you in a moment on the spreadsheet to show you the impact on value. Let me then talk about capitalization rate. The assessor uses 9%. We've heard him explain that it's a superior location and therefore it should have a lower capitalization rate. My answer to that is they're double counting. That's part of my answer. If it's a superior location that's going to do better, it's already reflected in the revenue. When you also assign a lower capitalization rate, you're effectively penalizing the hotel by increasing the value for the revenue it's able to generate. You can't have it both ways. That's the first concern I have. The second concern I have is on page 10, look at the list of hotels, all of which are limited service hotels or select service hotels, all of which get a 10% capitalization rate. So the Homewood and the Fairfield, they're located at Ellis and Empress, not very far from the airport. Yes, a shuttle is necessary. I will tell you, I have no doubt there are many people who take the shuttle from the airport to the Marriott because they don't know where to go, they don't know how to find it because it's on the other side of a very large parkade. They get a 10%. The Days Inn Winnipeg Airport, it's located on Berry Street. It gets a 10%. The Hampton Inn Winnipeg Airport, also located on Berry, it gets a 10%. The Humphrey Inn is downtown at a 10%, and the Hilton Garden, which is out by the new outlet mall on Kenniston, it gets a 10%. Why do all of these hotels that are select service get a 10% and the subject gets a 9%? That's not right. That shouldn't be. There's no reason from an investor perspective why an investor would pay more for the airport hotel because the premium the assessor says is there in terms of revenue is already accounted for in the NOI. So if he's also going to be assigned a lesser cap rate, he's going to pay twice. It is not equitable. It is not equitable for the department to assign a 9% capitalization rate to the subject property when all these other ones, most of them quite nearby, get a 10% rate. I suggest to you the investor will see no difference in the risk and quality of the investment. Next heading, page 10, leased land and capitalization rate. I point out the fact that from an investor's perspective, if you're on leased land, it's a higher risk, it's more difficult to finance, it creates more issues. There could be a premium put on it. We're not looking for that at this hearing, but we're just pointing out that that's another reason why the capitalization rate at 9% is too low. Equity. I mentioned a moment ago that they need to be treated equitably. At the top of the next page, there is a quote from our municipal board in a case where they talk about the concept of equity, and in it, they talk about a British Columbia Court of Appeal decision in Bramalia. And Bramalia is a very famous case in the equity world, and by coincidence, it involved two hotels in downtown Vancouver, right across the street from each other, connected to the Pacific Center, large shopping center in downtown Vancouver. For whatever reason, one of those hotels was getting a lower capitalization rate than the other. The court ultimately said, you can't do that. Unless there's a very good reason to do that, same location, same type of business, it's not equitable that one should have a lower capitalization rate compared to the other. And our municipal board has recognized this concept that and I'm reading now, in some circumstances, it may be appropriate to compare the characteristics and attributes of a specific property to similar properties. Mr. Newman references the Bramalia case. So that's an example of why, another reason why equity demands that we get a 10% capitalization rate like the rest. Also, equity and value. It is quite interesting that here's a chart of hotels in the airport area and the value assigned on a per room basis to these hotels. And it's quite interesting that the full service hotels, the Sheraton, Four Points, and the Grand, on a per room basis, have a lesser value than the subject hotel does, even though they're full service, and even though they have a lower capitalization rate. Just something to point out. So, our conclusion. And now the conclusion lists the adjustments we've made, so you can see them all in typewritten form at the bottom of page 11. But let me take you to the spreadsheet, which is found on page 11, sorry, tab 11, the last tab. What I have done is I have reproduced the assessor stabilized column. That's found on the left side of the page. And I have reproduced our stabilized column, which is found on the right-hand side of the page. All of the revenues are the same. The departmental expenses, there's a difference between rooms. And as I told you earlier, we've increased the rooms expense to 28.5%. And in the extreme right-hand column, we tell you what the manual says, that the expense ratios are for the industry average. So for rooms, it's 30%, we've moved it up to 28.5%. Then we come to admin and general. 11.4% was allowed, the manual says 19.5, we used 14.9. Marketing, 2.3% allowed, the manual says 4%, we used 3.5. Repair and maintenance, 2.4% allowed, manual says 5.5, we use 4.5. And then the reserve, the assessor uses 3%, we're using 5% for all the reasons I've articulated. The end result of that is that the net operating income is $1,024,000 compared to the assessor's $1,587,000 at a 9% capitalization rate, and I show you a 9 and a 10 rate. At a 9% rate, the assessor's value, of course, is $14,990,000. At a 10% rate, in that same column to the bottom of the page, the assessor's value becomes $13,490,000. Based on the NOI I'm suggesting, at a 9 cap, the value becomes $9,674,000, which is $79,954 per room. And at a 10 cap, the value becomes $8,707,000. So this is what we have done. The hotel was not appealed in 2018. That was a mistake on the part of the owners. They were not attentive to this issue. The same arguments would have been made at that time. Here's a hotel that's going up in value by 51%. When you look at the cap rate compared to other hotels in the area of the same type, when you look at the per room value, it seems excessive. So I'm asking for a revised value in accordance with our tab 11, utilizing the 10% capitalization rate and the adjustments I've described. That is my submission, subject to questions.
Thank you. Do you have questions?
Yes,
Mr.
thank you,
Dugan?
Madam Chair. And I have some rebuttals, so maybe I'll ask the questions first and then.
Ask your questions.
Okay, thank you. On page 1, you indicate that this was not appealed in 2018,
Correct.
but it was appealed in 2014 and 2016, that's correct?
I'm not sure, frankly,
Okay.
but I'll take your word for it.
Okay. You've given a definition of value, open market, willing seller, willing buyer. So this hotel was built for $20 million. They would be willing to sell it for 8.7.
So here's the problem with that question, because it's with respect, I think it's a bit of a misleading question. What something is built for, considering it's built for an economic life, and what it will sell for as part of a going concern or a going concern stripped of its business value are very different things. And so, at the end of the day, this methodology we have gets us to the value it gets us to for the real estate. Indeed, I'll suggest to you that if the government, through legislation, outlawed the operation of hotels, hotels are gone. There will be no hotels in Winnipeg. What would you do with this building? I'll suggest to you that this building would have very little value at all, and that it takes its value because of the nature of its construction only from the fact that it can operate as part of a going concern. So I think the answer is if the hotel business didn't work, they wouldn't get very much money for this at all, because the buyer would then have to figure out what are they gonna do with it. And in my view, almost the only thing you can do with hotels is turn them into a personal care home because of the size of the rooms. What else do you do with them?
Thank you. On page 3, the lease expense, you would agree that we're valuing the fee simple interest for the assessment appeal? The assessment purposes?
I know that's the view the department takes, so I will agree that that's the view the department takes. You've heard me on the fact that no buyer would ignore that expense.
And the definition of fee simple is an unencumbered property, that's correct?
Yes.
Thank you. On page 6, reserve for replacement. You cite the decision for Place Louis Riel. And third paragraph down, Mr. Killer bases this assertion on a number of factors, including the age of the hotel. So you'd agree that Place Louis Riel is older than the subject?
Yes.
Its suite orientation and the nature of the clientele, which he suggests leads to a higher degree of damage. You would agree that the subject has better clientele and is a newer hotel, so the suite configuration wouldn't be a issue?
So, it's a newer hotel, that goes without saying. Certainly, that's what the panel in that case said. I can't disagree with that.
Okay, thank you. And this was also being converted from an apartment, which doesn't apply to the subject, that's correct?
It wasn't being converted at that time. The conversion had happened already. It was an operating hotel at the time of this appeal.
But that was part of the decision, it was due to the conversion, they allowed the higher reserve.
You had more furniture in this place than you would have in a more traditional type of hotel, because it was an all-suite hotel. So it had more furniture in
In
it.
Place Louis
In
Real.
Place Louis, yes.
And the other decision you cite is the Fort Garry, obviously much older hotel than the subject.
Yes, but the reserve isn't about the structural nature of the property. The reserve is about replacement of FF&E.
Okay, I'll take you to page 7, that's your CapEx study, or CapEx 18. On page 59, which is, the numbers are located on the right-hand side of the document.
Which tab is that again?
Tab 7.
7, thank you.
So they have capital spending analysis by year of construction. You would agree that that's the heading on that?
Yes.
And it appears that the older the hotel, the higher the CapEx by year. So showing post 2000 at 4.5,
Yes.
and 1990 to 2000 at 6.5 almost.
1992,
On page 59,
yeah, I'm there,
the graph,
yeah. But 1992,
2000.
yes, at 6.4%.
Okay, so,
Right.
and then on the next page, page 60, once again, the graph, CapEx by age of property, the left-hand side, 1 to 5 years at 1.6.
Yes.
So, and that would be the category that this subject hotel falls into?
So it opened in 14.
Reference date is 18,
Well, physical condition though is we're here today to deal
still
with.
5 years.
Well, okay.
So, obviously, the newer the property, the lower the CapEx.
Sure, but this is a buyer looking forward, buying a future stream of income. So the buyer is not going to assume that he's gonna have 1.6% forever. Plus, the other observation I'll make to you is these stats you're looking at are for all select service hotels and not airport-related select service hotels, which, as the stats I showed, have a higher percentage of capital expenditures.
Okay, thank you. Your MPAC, what tab was that page? Tab 8, they don't actually cite, or tab 9, they don't actually cite a reserve for replacement percentage?
That's correct, they don't. They indicate that it'll be found in the industry, and that's why I suggest that the International Society of Hospitality Consultants reflects the industry.
Thank you. On tab 2, which is the valuation of hotels by the City of Winnipeg, the document, page 3, you didn't adjust the energy and water up.
I did not.
Any reason for that?
I left it alone because it's a newer hotel and therefore probably energy efficient.
Okay. But none, that doesn't apply to repair and maintenance?
Again, I didn't take it up to the 5.5%, I took it up a small amount.
But a newer hotel would generally have lower repair and maintenance?
I agree, but again, you're looking forward, the buyer's looking forward. The buyer's buying a future stream of income. So the energy efficiency that the building has will be there theoretically forever, subject only to variances in the cost of the utilities. But the repair and maintenance and marketing costs, those are all necessary to maintain the operation. Those will change over time.
Once again, on page 3, under fixed expenses, property tax, the average hotel for Rooms Hotel is paying 4.5% property tax, the subject is paying 3.6%. Would you agree?
Not for long, based on your proposed value.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Once again, with the, you've increased marketing from 2.3 to 3.5.
Yes.
This is a flagged hotel, correct?
Yes. That's correct.
Generally, would you agree that flagged hotels have lower marketing due to the built-in marketing that the flag provides with the central booking and et cetera?
So, flag operations charge their franchisees, their operators, a whole spectrum of expenses. Some of that is found typically in what's called the franchise fee, but some of them will find its way into what's called marketing. Loyalty programs, for example, a charge like that is frequently found in marketing. So, no, I won't agree it'll be cheaper. In fact, the reality is, if you're carrying a flag, you're typically paying anywhere from 9 to 13% of your revenues to the franchisor. It's expensive to carry a flag.
Yes, well, we're using the actuals
Yeah.
for the franchise.
Yeah.
But you would agree that some marketing is inherently through the flag you would
Yes.
receive, yeah.
Yes.
Page 10, you've compared a bunch of assessments. I believe that we are not to compare assessments at the Board of Revision.
You mean page 11?
Yes, sorry.
I'm sorry.
There was, yeah, I mean, I guess the equity, but yeah, page 11, there's a chart with all the assessed values. We're,
Right.
okay. And generally, we don't compare assessments, that's correct?
Well, it depends, as the municipal board case cited above on that page says, it may be appropriate to compare specific properties in similar circumstances, and the Bramalia case, which they rely upon, was a case involving hotels where they felt it appropriate to do it.
Okay, thank you. So I have some rebuttal. And this will apply to both properties, as Mr. Newman stated, that we have a lot of the same issues on both properties.
Thank you.
So I'll just quickly go through this. You need another copy? I can leave you this one.
Okay, thanks.
So page 1, we have the valuation of hotels and motels for assessment purposes. This is by Mr. Stephen Rushmore, which we've heard about today. We can skip right to page 15, sorry. So percentage of revenue, the total stabilized revenue for the subject property is estimated at, this is just an example, but the appropriate reserve for replacement expressed as a percentage of revenue has been set at 3%. And then the following highlighted passage. The industry norm for a reserve for replacement expressed as a constant percentage ranges from 2.5 to 3.5%. Sometimes the formula starts with a lower percentage, 1 to 2% during the initial years of operation, which is similar to the subject property, and increases in a series of steps to 4% to 5% level in the 7th to 10th year. For appraisal purposes, the constant percentage is the most appropriate. Turning to page 21, this is a board order for the subject property from 2016. It was reduced from $9,071,000 to $7,165,000, but at the bottom you can see the decision is based on a 9% capitalization rate. Mr. Newman's workup is on page 23 for that hearing. On page 25, I have the workup for 1999 Wellington. This is one of the other airport hotels which we've heard about. This is the 4 Points Winnipeg Airport. So this was a 2020 appeal. I'll just highlight the 3% FF&E reserve, capitalization rate at 8.5%. Total value at $12,950,000. On page 26, that is our reconciliation, similar to what I showed in the subject property. Once again, you'll see the land lease was removed from the expenses. On the following page is the decision for that hearing. You can see the decision was based on my recommendation, Mr. Penna's recommendation at $12,949,000, which is what I showed on the previous page. Once again, this is all actuals, with a slight increase to A&G to 10.4%. On page 29, we have another airport hotel, 1979 Wellington, the Grand. Once again, we've used all actuals in this assessment. 3% FF&E reserve, capitalized at 8.5%. You can see the total value at $11,266,000. Once again, on page 30, I show the reconciliation for that workup. Once again, the land lease was removed. And on page 31 is the decision for that hearing. Once again, the decision was based on the assessor's evidence and it was confirmed. Page 33, this is for the next property we're going to hear, 333 Waterfront, which is the Mir Hotel. This was the 2016 workup. Obviously, it's also a new hotel, so this was based on industry norms. It was cut from $6,660,000 to $6,139,000. Mr. Newman's workup is on page 34. Once again, the decision was based on an adjusted NOI and a capitalization rate of 9%. The following page, page 37, this is the 2018 workup for the 333 Waterfront, the following property. You'll see that there was no income and expense reported in 2015. Had they reported, it would have been a lot higher. This was not appealed at $3,256,000. This is the reason why we have the penalties. Had they reported, that assessment would have been much higher, as we will see on the next property. Page 39, and this is going to go towards the land lease. This is an excerpt from eValuation, which is a Canadian property publication. So on page 40, I have some highlighted passages. The impetus for the discussion paper is the perception that requirements for valuing fee simple interest have become muddled. For example, what does the notion of unencumbered mean in the context of valuing the fee simple interest? The Assessment Act defines current value as the amount of money the fee simple, if unencumbered, would realize if sold at arm's length by a willing buyer and a willing seller. On page 41, the most complete form of ownership is the fee simple interest. Absolute ownership, unencumbered by any interest or estate, subject only to the limitations imposed by the four powers of government: taxation, expropriation, police power, and escheat. On page 42, any positive or negative value associated, and this deals with an easement, which is similar, an encumbered property, similar to a land lease. Value associated with an easement represents the value of partial interest in land. Any effect on the market value of the servient tenement reflects loss of one of the rights comprising the whole of the bundle of rights that makes up a fee simple interest. Therefore, while an easement could potentially affect the market value of an owner's encumbered interest in the property, that effect must be ignored for assessment purposes. I believe the rest just goes over basically what I've touched on. On page 45, we have the land lease for the subject hotel, once again starting in 2012, ending in 2076. So for the airport property, when somebody has a land lease, that section of the property is carved out of the WAA. Therefore, if we allowed the land lease, we would be negating the value of that land, and then therefore nobody would be untaxed, essentially. On page 47, I have a municipal board order. This is Canad Inns Brandon Limited, located at 1125 18th Street. Assessment years are 05 and 06. On page 48, the property is located on a land lease from Keystone Agricultural and Recreation Center, Inc., referred to as Keystone. Under the lease, an additional 5.5 acres is shared, scattered hotel parking and Keystone patrons. So you see on page 51, Mr. Lucy argued that the annual land lease rent of $190,000 that Canad pays to Keystone is called for in the lease and as such is a cost to do business. A potential purchaser would know that this charge against revenue would take into consideration in arriving at the purchase offer. You'll note the next, I just highlighted the 3% reserve on this property, which was agreed to. We can go to page 56. The provincial assessor on this property was Mr. Funk. He explained that they had not deducted the annual land rent of $190,000 because it is a payment by the owner for the use of the land. It is analogous to allowing a mortgage payment when an owner purchases land. And you can see on page 64, the panel did agree with Mr. Funk. The board accepts the assessor's position that the deduction of land is akin to the deduction of a mortgage payment, which is universally recognized as a non-deductible expense for assessment purposes. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think we got a little off track, so let's back up. Ms. Stevens, did you have questions
Oh,
for
sorry.
Mr. Newman about his presentation? If you
Yes.
remember, yes.
Yes. Okay. On your page 9, so you've adjusted these percentages, but you haven't adjusted them to the amount in the manual. You've gone somewhere in between. What's the reasoning for that?
I did that because, again, the manual is industry averages, so obviously there will be some higher, some lower. I've actually frequently asked the department to give me the data, but they've never wanted to do that. So I felt that it was appropriate to go part way and not all of the way, recognizing the fact that they're averages.
The fact that this is a newer property playing to that at all, or?
A little bit in terms of repair and maintenance.
Okay. What else did I have? Oh, this was just sort of a matter of interest on my part, but could play into this, I guess. The airport, on the CAPEX study, the airport hotels were consistently higher. Is that just due to the competition on an airport property, or?
No, well, it's interesting, because I asked my client about that as well. Because he said, we get very transient guests. And I said, well, but by their nature, every hotel has transient guests. That's what they are by definition, people coming and going. He said, yes, but with airports, very, very typically, it's one night only. They're in and out. And so they're constantly, in his mind, there's more wear and tear on the facilities. And also because of the competition, there's a need to keep it up to a higher standard or you lose your competitive position.
Okay. You mentioned a couple of times about sweat equity, and you were referring to the administration and general allowances. Is there something particular to this hotel in
Yes.
that? Because you weren't specific about it.
That's right. So, and thank you for that. So the reality is that the principals of this company, and these are the individuals that are in the picture that is part of the assessor's brief, and it's the president. They run this hotel, but they don't draw salary. So there's nothing that appears in the management wages, which is typically where you would find that type of thing. At the end of the day, they will receive their money in the form of the bottom line profit. But if they chose not to be active in the operation of the hotel, you'd have another body in the hotel, you'd have an additional wage. And that was part of the reason why I moved up the admin in general to reflect that. When we come to talk about the Mirror, you're gonna hear something a little different from me in terms of its management and its operation, because it's not flagged. But in the context of this hotel, it's the fact that ownership does not draw any wage out of the hotel, and that has the effect, in part, of reducing their admin and general expense.
Because they are actively there, you're
Right.
saying, okay.
Yeah.
And just one last question I had, so you're making a case for a 5% reserve. Now, is this just for this type of hotel property, or are you saying this for all hotel properties?
No, for sure I'm going to say it for this type of hotel property, and when I say this type, I would include full service and the select service in that as well. For the beverage hotels, I don't think I'm going to go there, but that's not what we're dealing with today. So yes, certainly for what I'm gonna call the rooms-oriented hotels, I will argue for the higher reserve.
Okay, that's all I had, thank you.
Mr. McIntyre?
I have no questions.
I have no questions. Okay, so now, Mr. Newton, do you have questions for the assessor?
And, you know, I can do them as questions, or I can simply do them as comments, and that'll be my final word, whatever the board prefers. I think it's probably simpler if I just do them as
Do
comments.
them as your comments
Yeah.
then? Okay, well then let me see if the board has questions.
Sure.
Okay. Ms. Stevens, do you have questions?
I did not have questions on the rebuttal.
Okay.
I have no questions.
And I have no questions, and please go ahead with your
So,
comment.
and this article by Rushmore, so when I started doing this work, in the early 90s, I learned about hotels. And I learned from some people who were hospitality industry consultants, people who were part of Laventhal Horwath, which is well known in the hospitality industry. Rushmore was the guy. His company, HVS, is still the company. But this article is from 1984. And so the quotation that the assessor took you to, which is found on page 15, that's what was being said in 1984. But let's also remember that the article talks about increasing to 4 to 5% as the years go by. Notwithstanding what Mr. Rushmore wrote in 1984, in 1999, which is my tab 8, the Rushmore article, he said something different. So there's 2 columns in that article. If you look in the left-hand column, down at the bottom, 3 lines from the bottom, 40 years ago, an appropriate FF&E reserve for replacement would have been 2%. Today, the industry standard has risen to 4 to 5% because FF&E now represents a higher component of a hotel's total cost. Looking into the future, hotel owners must recognize the standard reserve will not be sufficient to handle technology replacements and upgrades. And he goes on to talk about, so now if we go down in the right-hand column, there's his picture in the middle, the first full paragraph below that on the right-hand side. Adding the various reserves for replacement provides an indication of how much money must be put back to a hotel in order to protect it from functional obsolescence and physical deterioration. Between 4 and 5% are needed for FF&E. Tack on 2 to 3% for technology, another 1 to 3% for permanent components yields a total requirement of 7 to 11%. And of course, we have the CapEx study, which is very supportive of that. So I don't quarrel what Rushmore said way back in 1984, but clearly his thinking has evolved since then, as is reflected in the article he wrote, and clearly the International Society of Hospitality Consultants have also come to have a very different view of what's actually happening in the real world. That's the only comments I have about his rebuttal. Actually, sorry, one more comment. He took you to the article which starts at page 39. And he read to you some things from that article. Page 40, I think it's important to note at the bottom of the page, the definition in the Assessment Act of Ontario, which defines current value as the amount of money the fee simple, if unencumbered, would realize if sold at arm's length, willing seller, willing buyer. We don't have that definition in our legislation. Our definition is value, simply willing buyer, willing seller in the open market at the applicable reference date. Those are my comments, thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody need a short break before we move on?
Yes, please.
Okay, we'll take that 5 minutes. Okay, all right, we're calling the meeting back to order. The next matter on the docket is 333 Waterfront Drive. Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Roll number is 13096194700. Subject's located at 333 Waterfront Drive. We have a 2020 assessment at $10,467,000. The subject is a 2013 hotel consisting of 2 buildings, one of which is 1-story, the other which is 3-story. The hotel has 67 guest rooms. So once again, this was built in 2013. On page 3, I have my income approach showing 2015, 2016, 2017. Once again, we've used the actual 2017 revenue at $4,687,954. We've used the actual departmental expenses at $2,225,957. We've used the actual undistributed expenses, plus the deduction for management fee and FF&E reserve at 4% and 3%. This total is $1,138,921. We've used the actual 2017 taxes and insurance, generating a stabilized net operating income of $1,108,298. Once again, we've capitalized this at 9% and removed a further 15% for FF&E deduction, yielding our final value of $10,467,000. Once again, on page 4, I have my breakdown of administration and general at the top. We've used the actual at $269,018. And my reconciliation showing what we removed from the expenses, namely amortization, the interest expense, equipment rental and lease, and rent at $111,804. We've heard the capitalization rates on page 5. We can skip right to page 8. So this is located on waterfront between Pacific and James Avenue. You can see the aerial photograph. The building has the piano roof, and the other building is SIBO, the restaurant that is affiliated with the hotel. Some pictures. This is a very modern hotel. They label themselves as a boutique hotel. There's various pictures of the interior and exterior. Page 13 shows the restaurant. Page 14 shows some rooms and a meeting room. Page 15 shows the lobby. Once again, we have a newspaper article from the Winnipeg Free Press. This one's dated 2013, December. Just read the highlighted passages. These are quotes from the owner, Mr. Ben Sparrow. We've wanted to do a hotel project in the Exchange District for 8 years. We were finally able to find a project that works. He references the fact that the other hotel he owns, the Inn at the Forks, was so busy that they were at risk of losing market share if they didn't come up with more supply. It shows some of the difference in the rates between the two hotels. They mention that the restaurant is separate from the hotel. On page 18, they reference that it's an $11 million hotel property. Page 19, this is a list of, well, it's the list of the country's best hotels. You'll see 3 Winnipeg hotels made that list, including the Mir, the Fairmont, and the Inn at the Forks. Mir actually coming in the highest at number 27. They do state that they offer simplicity and just the essentials, but very few mid-range hotels can boast an espresso machine and molten brown toiletries in its rooms. The following pages are the income and expense statements that we received from the controller of the property, and then there's financial statements preceding the handwritten statements, starting on page 27. Once again, we've used all the actuals. I see the NOI is increasing from just under 800,000 in 15 to just over 1.3 million in 2017. We've stabilized using the actuals minus the FF&E deduction and the management fees. And based on that, we ask that the assessment be confirmed at $10,467,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Newman, do you have questions for the assessor?
I do.
Please go
Page 3.
Yeah.
So that's the layout of the revenues and expenses.
Correct.
So the revenues in 2015 are $4,105,000.
Correct.
In 2017, which is your stabilized, it's $4,687,000. So it's up by round numbers $582,000. And that then turns into an increase in value from $3.25 million to the proposed $10,467,000. Correct?
Well, once again, referring to my rebuttal documents, I showed the workup for the last cycle assessment. 2015 was not submitted. Therefore, the assessment would have been higher had it been submitted, and there would have been penalties had it been appealed.
This hotel makes the lease payment each year to the city of Winnipeg?
I assume that's the rent?
No, I don't think it is actually. So just come to the cover page of your brief.
Yes, no, I understand that the city of Winnipeg is listed as an owner. I'm just trying to find where it is. I guess that would be equipment rental and lease
No,
in my
I'll
reconciliation.
show you where it is. Look at page 28. You've got the, along the left-hand margin, you've got revenue, you've got expenses, and then you've got a line called total expenses, that's in bold.
Yep,
Come up 3 from that, land lease,
yep,
$41,870.
correct.
Okay. So, I don't know where that is here, but you're telling us you wouldn't allow it anyways.
I'm assuming it's in equipment rental and lease, which was unreported in 15, 15,000 in 16, and then jumped to 56,000, which 15 plus 41, roughly about 56, so I would
Okay.
assume it's in there.
All right, so, but in any event, it's been disallowed.
Correct.
Okay. And page 17 of your brief, down at the bottom. So that last paragraph, the hotel's a limited service property,
Limited service luxury brand.
right? not flagged.
Correct.
So this hotel is operated by local operators, correct?
Correct.
And so you mentioned, and Ben Sparrow was mentioned in the article, and do you know Ben Sparrow to be part of the Sparrow family that has operated the Norwood for many years?
Norwood, the Inn at the Forks, and they are correct.
And like the last property, if we come back to your page 3, so let's look at your undistributed expenses. Admin in general is 8.2%.
Correct.
And that's made up of 2 items. It's made up of $269,018, which is found on page 4.
Correct.
But it's also made up of $115,355 of wages and benefits.
Correct.
And typically, the way hotels report their expenses is what I'm gonna call the general managers, the assistant managers. Those are the people who end up in the A&G wages section, right? As opposed to being in departments.
Correct.
And go to page 24. So that's the admin and general breakdown from the questionnaire. Column B on the right-hand side, salaries and wages, $115,355.
Correct.
That's the number that we just talked about, that we see on page 3 as part of the A&G.
Yep.
Right? That makes up part of the 8.2%. And then there's the management fee of $111,282. That's not allowed as an expense, is it?
Well, we stabilize management fees at 4%.
Okay, so, but let's be clear on something. The 4% has got nothing to do with people who work in the hotel and get paid. It's the fiction that is used to remove the non-assessable business value, correct?
Correct, but if you hired an outside company to manage your hotel, it would be located in that line for the years reported.
Right. So if Ben Sparrow worked in the hotel and drew a wage as manager, that would be a management wage and there'd be no issue about it.
But if he hired somebody and paid them $111,000, then we would stabilize at 4%.
If Ben Sparrow worked in the hotel and got paid $111,000, he'd be part of A&G management wages.
But they've listed it as management fees.
I understand that. I'm simply putting to you that if he drew a wage from the hotel, he'd be part of management wages.
Well, it always gets blurry because if the owner works and makes a wage,
Yeah,
but if he hired somebody and didn't work,
yeah.
then it would be management fees. So it's a little bit blurry. If he
Okay.
removed himself from the process, it would be stabilized at 4%, but if he,
Okay,
you understand?
yeah, oh, I understand. Thank you, those are my questions.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens.
So that rent number, do you know what that is?
I'm assuming it's an internal rent paid to, for the restaurant.
Restaurant, that's what I was thinking, yeah, okay. Thank you, that's all I had, thanks.
Just a general question on page 3, is this a franchise hotel?
It is not, however, they are showing a franchise fee, which we have allowed. It's pretty low at 1.6%, but perhaps Mr. Newman could expand on that.
Now?
Sure.
So, but there's a bit of a story to this, which I'm happy to deal with now. So, this hotel is operated by local ownership. The Sparrow family, longtime Norwood Hotel, Inn at the Forks more recently, they operate and are owners in part of this hotel. Ben Sparrow is the principal, his father Bob has pretty much retired, but Ben is the guy who's doing all this. So, and you know, the interesting part is, and this is why when we were dealing with the Marriott, I said to you, you'd hear more of a story about sweat equity in the context of this hotel. So Ben Sparrow provides his services to the hotel. This hotel doesn't have a flag. This hotel, and I'm going far afield at this point, I'm really getting into my submission, and I don't want to do that. So let me just try
Can you
and
give
answer.
us a
Yeah, let me just try
very
and.
concise
Cole's notes version?
Yes.
answer as to what the franchise fee is for?
Exactly. It's a fee related to the operations by the Sparrow Management Company of the hotel. That's what it is.
Okay, and there is no flag on it.
And there's no flag.
Okay, thank you, that's it.
Do you have any other questions?
No, that's it.
Okay. Let me do that. Okay, now you may proceed with
All right.
your presentation.
So, and I said to you earlier that a lot of the issues that arise here are the same as the issues that arose in the Marriott.
Yes.
So I'm not gonna take you through all the detail I
That's
took
fair.
you through
Thank
before.
you.
My brief is structured in exactly the same way. It raises a number of the same issues. It raises the land lease issue, and we've got the same analysis and commentary in relation to it. It raises the reserve for replacement issue. I make exactly the same points on the same basis in relation to that. You've got the decisions on the lease issue from the 4 Points case and from the 360 Main case. On the reserve issue, you've got the Place Louis decision, you've got the CapEx study, and you've got the Rushmore article, all speaking to those issues together with the MPAC guide. Clearly, this is a rooms-oriented hotel. The owner describes it as limited service. That's why I asked at the outset, what's the difference between limited service and select service? But clearly, this is not a full-service property like a Fairmont, for example. So I address all of that with you. So now, let me tell you a little bit about how the operation of the hotel is structured, because that becomes important in the context of some of the expenses. So the Sparrow family obviously has been in the hotel business a very long time. They built up expertise, and they don't have a flag. The Inn at the Forks doesn't have a flag either. Neither does the Norwood. And yet, essentially, they've created their own internal marketing system, I'll call it. They have expertise in that area. And for tax reasons, that expertise is provided to the hotel from a Sparrow-related corporation. And that's why you see, as I said earlier, the franchise fee is really paid to a Sparrow-related corporation, because it's providing what any other franchisor would provide: the know-how, the expertise, the systems for the operation of a hotel. That's what you get when you buy a flag. You get all those things. So they provide that, and the reason I asked Mr. Brown about if Ben received a salary from the hotel, it would be part of management salaries, management wages. It would form part of A&G. And the A&G in this hotel, which is 8.2%, compared to the industry average of 19.5%, would be much higher. But they do it in a different way. But if I come along, if any one of you come along to buy this property, you may decide to go affiliate with a flag. You might decide to do that. Alternatively, you might decide to continue the relationship with the Sparrow family in terms of management. But these are costs that are going to be incurred, and the hotel cannot operate without these expenses being incurred. And so when we looked at the expense ratios for a variety of the expense lines, and I didn't go through this line by line with Mr. Brown, because essentially it's the same process that we went through on the last one, but I'm going to take you to it now for a moment. So if you look at page 3 of his brief, you can see that in this hotel, departmental expenses rooms is at 30%, which is the industry average, so that's left untouched. Admin in general is at 8.2%. The Marriott was at 11.4, we increased that to 14.9. Here it's at 8.2%, and we've increased it to 13% of revenue. And I'll show you all of that on the spreadsheet that's at my tab 11 in a moment. Marketing, the actual marketing is 2.5%. We've increased it to 3.5%. Repair and maintenance was 2.3%. We've increased it to 3.5%. And again, I'll show you all this in the spreadsheet. And so we've made these adjustments. And the effect of that, of course, is to change the net operating income. The increase to admin in general is significantly to take into account the fact that, again, the people who are actually running the hotel, they choose to take their money out by way of fee. That's why, again, I directed Mr. Brown's attention to page 24 of his brief and the item that's called management fee in the left-hand column. So the issue is that the structure shouldn't change the nature of the value. So effectively what we've done is we've increased the A&G allowance to 13%, as I indicated earlier, but I also wanted to very carefully make the distinction that the 4% management fee, as it's called, it's how you get the goodwill out. That's its purpose. It's a legal fiction, or it's a calculation fiction for purposes of valuing hotels. It's got nothing to do with the actual operation of the business enterprise. And that's the point I want to make to you. So when we look at, and let me take you now to my tab 11. So you can see in tab 11, if you look at the undistributed expenses section and the admin in general, and in this one, the admin in general was broken down into two sections. It was broken down into the admin in general of $269,018, and as well the A&G wages and benefits of $115,355. I've left the A&G wages alone, but I've increased it to a total of 13%, 10.5% on the admin in general, and 2.5% on the A&G wages. Probably I should have done it the other way around, because the intent is to pick up an appropriate allowance for the cost of the managers who are actually running the hotel. And then the same thing with marketing. You can see it's been increased to 3.5%. The extreme right-hand column is the manual. The same thing with repair and maintenance, increased to 3.5%. 5.5% is the manual. And the same thing with the reserve, for up to 5% for all the same reasons you've heard. And the effect of that is that the net operating income now becomes $640,000. If you capitalize that at 9%, the value becomes $6,045,000, still more than double what the 2018 was. On the issue of capitalization rate, really the submission to you is much the same. This is a limited service property, not located at the airport. So that whole argument about premium for that location, it's a limited service property, it's located off the airport. There's no reason why it shouldn't get a 10% capitalization rate. The equity argument goes to that as well. And really at the end of the day, if you use the 10 cap in my NOI, then the value becomes $5,440,000 compared to the assessor's $10,467,000 at a 9 cap. and 9,420,000 at a 10 cap. So at the very least, I think the cap has to go to 10 for the reasons I've said, and those are my submissions.
Thank you very much. Do you have questions? Mr.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So this hotel was built in, was it 2013?
Approximately, yeah.
2016, you appealed this property, and it was set to $6,139,000.
Right.
They used a 9% cap. It's on page 35 of my, if you'd like to refer to it, my rebuttal.
Oh, we need other rebuttal.
Right.
What did I do? Sorry, what page?
35.
Thank you.
Right, but none of that was based on actuals, because we didn't have actuals at that
Of
point.
course.
Yeah,
That was an appeal to the municipal board?
I don't believe so.
Okay, thank you. The next page, page 37, that's the 2018 assessment. You'll agree that 2015 was not submitted?
There's nothing in the column here.
Yeah, and it shows on my brief too that it
Okay.
wasn't submitted. That conceivably would have been higher had they submitted 2015?
Conceivably.
Okay. You haven't shown the 3 years in your stabilized workup?
I've not.
Okay. You'd agree that revenue is increasing?
Yes.
You would expect, and I believe you've argued, that a startup hotel has more risk, and that generally you'd advocate for a lower value on a startup hotel? Or you have?
I have in the past, yes, in the form of a higher capitalization rate.
Thank you. And you're actually advocating for a lower assessment for 2020 than in 2016 when this was a startup hotel?
Right, but we were all guessing in 2016.
Of course. Those are all my questions, thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Stevens?
No, I don't think I have anything, thanks.
Mr. McIntyre?
I have one question. I'm rather confused on this franchise fees appearing again on tab 11.
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned that admin and general, you bumped that up to take into account management fees?
Right.
Yet they're also claiming the 77,000 franchise fees.
Right. So the manager wages and call it management fee, I mean, that's the body that does the work and provides the service. The franchise fee is the payment for the systems.
Okay,
That's the difference.
no further questions.
And I have no questions. Okay, thank you.
Sometimes it's good to do a dry run. It makes the second one go a lot quicker.
All right, the next matter is 112 Marion's.
That's being withdrawn.
It's been withdrawn. Okay. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, thank you, panel members.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Have a good morning.
Thank you, good luck.